Hi, this is Paul. One of the things people ask me often is how I manage to make these videos while I'm also doing other things, because this isn't my job. It's because I try to get really efficient at this stuff, and I have my office set up so that I can make videos quickly and shortly and I almost never do any real editing. So Saturday, the video I made about the Saturday video, about the Saturday morning session, I noted a few things, and one of the things was this.
There's only one more item that I have to do, and then I believe we have someone scheduled to pray to end the session, and then we'll go to committees. This also pertains to at least one overture that we have, but since those overtures haven't been processed yet, I have an announcement from Classis Minn Kota and an announcement from Classis Zeeland that were on their credentials that I am required to read. Classis Minn Kota and its delegates, both their regular delegates and alternates, by rule of Synod 2007, offer protest to the seating of women delegates to Synod for reasons of conscience. We wish to make clear that our protest is not against women or using their gifts in the church.
Okay, so I played that before, and I noted that this is often from the Women in Church office wars at the end of the 20th century, in the 1980s and the 1990s. When I was a seminarian and when I was beginning ministry, this was a very hot bone of contention. And then in assemblies where women were seated, both at the classical level, this happened at our classes. It doesn't happen anymore because the one church that kept filing these. When you go to a classis or a synod meeting, you create a credential, and that credential is a communication from the other assembly, either from the council to the classis, or the classis to the synod, that these are the official representatives of the local council or of the classis to the assembly that's the next broadest assembly. And you can write anything you want on these credentials, any concerns that you have. It's a way to communicate. You attach it to the credential. And so Classis Minn Kota and Lloyd Hemstreet, who was on the channel from Classis Zeeland, communicated to Synod their protest and the reasons that they are serving, even though they are against the fact that women are seated at these meetings. And as I mentioned before, this becomes an irritant to many of the women. And so there actually was an overture this year with respect to this practice, and that got taken up Monday morning.
Recommendations. First, it has caused pain to some delegates.
Okay, so again, this is from an advisory committee of Synod. They received Overture 1 from Classis Niagara that was complaining about this practice, and so the advisory committee has to now figure out what to do with this overture. An overture is usually a request for action of some sort. And Synod receives that, goes to an advisory committee. The advisory committee has to make a decision on it, and so this is the decision that the advisory committee made.
I'm not sure we have the right one up on the screen.
When we come to it, I'll do just that. Very good. So Overture 1 responds to Classis Niagara refrain from reading repetitious notes at the beginning of Synod. Our observations as an advisory committee: any classis or delegate has the right to written protest. However, the repeated reading of these protests has caused pain to some delegates. Therefore, while not acceding to Overture 1, we make the following recommendations.
Now, when the committee says it does not accede to the overture, it means that when you accede to the overture, you say, the overture is right, this is what we're recommending to Synod, just like the overture says. Now, they declined the overture, said, we're not acceding, but this is what we're going to do. And usually when they do that, you get a little bit of agreement and a little bit of disagreement. Sometimes it's just complete disagreement. When they accede, it's a complete agreement.
First, if a notice on credentials presents a protest about seating female delegates, the president of Synod would name the individual or classis protesting and then read the following statement. We as delegates acknowledge that there are a multitude of perspectives and opinions represented among us. We recognize there are two different perspectives and convictions on the issue of allowing women to serve in the offices of deacon, elder, minister, or commissioned pastor, both of which honor the Scriptures as the infallible Word of God. And by the way, that wording is taken from Acts of Synod 1995. Some object that there are women seated as delegates. Others lament that there are not more women among us. We choose to work together despite these differences. Then secondly, that Synod declare this to be its response to Overture 1.
Now, just to summarize this, as you saw before, the chair read what was on the credential. The advice here is that the chair recognizes the nature of the protest and instead reads this generic form which tries to both express the protest and perhaps minimize the offense. Now, generally speaking, a chair at a classis or a synod meeting can decide to read anything that they want to, but this sort of smooths away, and then the question is, what's synod going to think about this?
Okay, let's take item number 1, and you notice that the revision from what's on the screen is just, it fleshes out with language of Synod exactly what this means. And so on your computer screens in front of you, you should have the right recommendation. We just don't have it up on the screens for you. So just so everyone's clear on what we're discussing. So recommendation number 1 is moved and on the floor. Any conversation or discussion? Are you in the speaker queue? Please use the speaker queue. I know it's the first time this morning at least, but you can use the speaker queue.
Now, something's interesting about, you see that as at classes at Synod, we talk about it being a body, and each of the bodies is different. And it's very interesting sort of watching how the body moves. Sometimes it takes Synod a little bit to warm up, to sort of feel itself. Sometimes Synod is like a horse that just bolts out of the gate and right away everybody wants to talk. But, you know, they just had a bunch of reports, everybody's sitting there. So Minn Kota and Classis Zealand, these two classes, had their own things. Are they going to be happy with this, not happy with this? And everybody's just kind of waiting. Is somebody going to say something about this, or is this just going to fly through? And the funny thing about Synod is sometimes these things just fly through. Sometimes little things that you don't think are going to draw any attention at all, just sort of Synod gets all knotted up in it. It's its own thing.
If you'd like to speak, if you're having trouble, raise your hand and we'll certainly honor you. Don't want to leave anyone out. All right, we have Eric Tisch, Classis Hamilton.
Hello, Eric Tisch, Classis Hamilton.
You can lift it, I think, by there you go. By squeezing, there you go.
Okay.
Remember, Embody, learn how to use the microphone. It's not always very easy.
I'd just like to ask maybe what is an obvious question. It's my first time at Synod. Can it be clarified that the president must read all communications before Synod commences?
Right, so if I heard right, you're asking, must all communications or statements on credentials be read at the beginning of classes? We had sort of an interesting discussion. By tradition, that's been the case, but when we researched synodical rules of order and procedure, we found that there was no such rule. And
this is not an unusual thing, that we've always done it this way. This is the way we do it. And when you're in the body and you practice this is just the way we do it. And then when a controversy arises, well, is this a rule? When I got to my church, there were all sorts of things that people in church were saying, well, the church order says we have to do it this way. And I was like, I've read the church order. I think I know what it says. That's not in the church order. Or it was something that sounded like it. And so these little oral traditions develop. And then when you have a conflict like this, well, then suddenly well, are the rules about it? How are we to regard how we go about this?
It's really more been our tradition, and therefore no one would be bound to do that at the beginning.
Maybe Kathy could read the actual rule for us.
Yes, this is Church Order Article 45, Supplement B1. Delegates who believe the seating of or election of women delegates or synodical deputies is in violation of the Word of God may record their protest on the appropriate credentials. Their names, along with the protests, shall be recorded in the minutes of Synod.
So they need to be recorded, but not necessarily orally read.
Okay, may I follow up, or?
Please.
What if the protest is about something other than the question at hand? Is the president required to read that communication?
Again, I believe the rules on other communications simply say recorded. Kathy?
This particular provision in the church order is specifically regarding women in office.
And there is no other provision as to what happens with statements on the credentials?
No, there is not.
Okay.
Okay. I'll close very quickly. So this may be the first instance where we have a compelled statement that the president must read in response to a protest or communication. And
Thank you, Eric. I'm not seeing any other speakers on my list. Are we ready to vote? Are you trying to get in the queue there? Oh, yep, there you are, Sonia.
Sonia Boersma from Classes Eastern Canada, Elder. I do not see, I'm not in favor of this motion. I don't think it's necessary to repeat the same thing over and over in each synod, and especially where it's not necessary. Maybe, I just don't see that it's necessary. And it's certainly extremely unwelcoming for many delegates, male and female. Thank you.
What's interesting about that comment is the whole purpose of this overture was to try to address what had been an irritant.
Thank you. We have no other speakers. I believe that means we're ready to vote. All in favor of this recommendation, say aye. Aye. All opposed? That motion carries.
And that was it. And so this is how things get formed at church. And no speech by Minn Kota, no speech by Zealand, the two groups that had brought credentials, and they're happy to have this language reflect what they think. So I thought that was a very little interesting tidbit. And Synod is just sort of warming up. It's sort of clearing its throat, and a little bit later it'll find a little bit more traction. So I just had a little bit of time to make this little video, and so here it is.